What is up, everybody? Welcome to the show. I'm going to be doing something a little bit differently today. We're actually going to be doing a visual of the last episode, episode 18, Gods of Valor, on Deep Dives season number 1. So today I just kind of wanted to go over Ramses II and to also go over the Battle of Kadesh, which was the first recorded battle, making it, quote unquote, the oldest battle of history. We know everything that happened in the Battle of Kadesh. We know what went down. We know estimates of how many people were involved in it. It's a really interesting time. We even have firsthand accounts that would really illuminate this. So I would encourage the listener to go check out that episode number 18. It's Inspiration Podcast, all one word, the capital I and capital P. Search that on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, whatever, and it'll come up. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is Ramses II. Ramses II enjoyed a very, very long reign, like 68 years or something like that. And he had hundreds of potential heirs, hundreds of wives. His military prowess was almost, in my opinion, unmatched. I don't think anybody really matched Ramses II. And nobody would come after him who would be as great. So we could see here that his mummy actually represents kind of what he would look like in person too. And they have a few, recreations, and these things are kind of hard to judge here, but that's probably not what he looked like entirely. You could tell the nose is, I don't know if his nose would look like that, but I don't know, maybe. Pretty interesting picture there. But the Battle of Kadesh was led by Ramses II, and in order to make it to Kadesh, he had to make a few detours. So this is the map I wanted to go to. So he starts obviously in around here, around the Nile Delta. He levies his army in Pi-Ramses and then goes off on a campaign. And he actually goes on a campaign early in his reign, just a short one. He comes up here all the way to Kadesh, sacks the city, takes loot, and then comes back. And then the Hittites up here in Anatolia are really angered by that. They don't like that. So they come down, they retake it. And this is after, they come down to retake it. And at this point, you have the city-states in this area defecting to the Hittites, sending pleas for help. And that's when Ramses is starting to gather his armies. So what Ramses does initially is he comes into Canaan and he employs the help of a tribal village called the Ne'arim. And basically, he just meets with these people and he sends them up and over through Tyre. They set sail around Tyre, and then they sail all the way up to the northern flank of the zone called Amuru. They touch base, and then they're supposed to come down from the north and support the armies of Ramses II against the Hittites. What is interesting about the Battle of Kadesh is that the massive armies that were brought up by the Hittite king Muwatalli II and Ramses II never fully confronted each other. And that's what's really interesting. So Muwatalli actually parks his army right over here in the Hittite camp, which is to the northeast of Kadesh, and he keeps them there. So when Ramses actually departed, we got to backtrack a little bit and then come back to here. But it's really cool to know that the Hittite army of like 36,000 people never fully comes into play for the Battle of Kadesh. What instead happens is he sends out a chariot charge against one of the divisions of Ramses II. Okay, so we can go ahead and talk about the military structure of the Egyptian army here. So Ramses II brings up a force of about 20,000 people. And he has, I think, 1,500 chariots. I could be off, but he has a couple thousand chariots, ideally. And in each chariot, there's two Egyptians, and we can kind of see how this goes with some art here. This is sort of what it would have looked like. So you would have a very lightweight chariot, easy to move around. They were built to maneuver quickly and act mostly as skirmishing vehicles. So you would have a driver, and then you would have somebody with a composite bow just shooting out arrows. So this was the shock unit of the Egyptian army. Now, if you were to look at the Hittite chariot, it's like a panzer in comparison. You would have 3 people per chariot, and they would have an armored chariot that's obviously a little bit less mobile. You can't move this around as fastly and as evasively as an Egyptian chariot would have been used, and you would have had 3 people per chariot. So this was a very deadly force, uh, troop within the Hittite military that was really feared during this time in history. So you have this unit against this unit. Okay. Okay, so let's, like I said, let's talk about the Egyptian army really quick, because that's what we have full insight into. The Hittite army is a little bit more speculative. They didn't leave behind succinct records for us to look at. Okay, but this is kind of what the components of the Egyptian army would have looked like. You would have your soldier here. You would have the Nubian archer, which was the most deadly units of the Egyptian army. I would argue they were mercenaries. They were brought into the Egyptian military, and a lot of these people would actually take up prominent posts later on in the history of Egypt. But you would have soldiers with bludgeons, with really dull swords. Not dull, but by today's standards, they were not, really fine. You would have a very lightly armored soldier. Up here, you could see he's very, very lightly armored, completely shirtless. And the interesting thing about the Egyptian military was that they fought barefoot. They didn't have sandals on when they were fighting. They would take off the sandals before they went out and fought. But another really cool thing is that none of these weapons that we see right here were divvied out until the eve of battle. So when they were marching, the Egyptian soldiers actually just had bludgeons and staves and stuff like that to protect themselves. And then the pharaoh would order that the military be given the more advanced weapon. So you would have shields, you would have spears, and then this bronze sickle sword was very heavily looked for. Like it was kind of a sign of status, like the chariot was. And this is kind of like what a pharaoh would have looked like when he fought. Shoes off, a very nice composite bow. He would have had his armor on. He would have had his war crown, the kapresh, and the kopesh. The kaphesh rather is the curved sword that they used in battle. Okay, so let's move forward to the eve of battle. So basically, what happened until this point is that in Anatolia, you have Muwatalli II levy his military from like 18 different vassal states all across Anatolia. They all come to him somewhere probably in the Taurus Mountains, where the new capital was positioned, and then he sets off for Kadesh from the north, and he starts coming down there in Egypt after they elicit the help or enlist the help of the um, Nearim warriors, and they set off the sea. Ramses actually has to break his army into 4 different parts because his army of 20,000, if they were to march all collectively at the same time, that they would eat the countryside up. They would run out of water. It was impossible to march this many people at one time just because of supply reasons. And the majority of the army actually had to supplement their daily rations by foraging the countryside and frankly by just stealing from people in the areas. And so it would have been impossible for him to do it all at once. So what he did was he took the divisions of Amun, Ra, Ta, and Set, and he divided them. And in each division, so the division of Amun would have 5,000 soldiers, Ra would have 5,000 soldiers, and so on. And they marched northward with about a half day's march in between them, and that left a lot of vulnerability. But Ramses II didn't expect him to have the full encounter until somewhere up in Kadesh. So that's how he traveled up towards Kadesh. And we can see that in order to get to Kadesh, they have to pass the river Orontes through this ford right here. And this was a serious part that will play in the future, is that when the division of Ra comes up here, something really interesting happens. Okay, remember how a little while ago I said that Ramses and his scribes were able to record this battle and the kind of eve of the battle and all the things leading up to it in extreme detail? We actually have a lot of firsthand accounts. And one of these firsthand accounts actually happens before the battle in the highland south of the city of Kadesh. So if we were to pull up the Kadesh right here, it would have been somewhere south of Kadesh. And they were camped. And basically what happened was 2 tribesmen who were of the tribe of Shazu, came up to Ramses II camp and pretty much came in front of him and started telling him things and giving them insight, supposedly, right? And this is what they said. They came up and they told the pharaoh, quote, "Our brethren, who belong to the greatest of the families with the vanquished chief of Keta, who is the Hittite king, have made us come to his majesty to say, we will be subjects of the Pharaoh, and we will flee from the vanquished chief of Keta, for the vanquished chief of Keta sits north in the land of Aleppo, which is somewhere up here, and that the Hittite king fears to come southward." Okay, so I kind of messed up that quote towards the end, but you get the gist, I think. So basically, they were lying to him. They straight up lied to the guy and saying that the Hittite king was somewhere up here, when in fact he was literally right there. He was right on the doorstep, and Ramses II didn't even know it. So what he did was, getting this message, he probably spurred his army into action so that he could make the first move up to Kadesh with his 5,000 soldiers. And we have to remember that the Hittites had a army of about 36,000 people, which is massive by ancient, even by today's standards, it's big, but by ancient standards, that's like a world war going on. And some people have even made that argument that this was the first ever world war, so to speak. Okay. So when Ramses moved up and spurred his armies towards Kadesh, he made a camp right about, if I could find this picture for you guys real quick, it'll help out the visuals, but it looks like Wikipedia doesn't want to show me it. We can just look here. Okay, so he comes up here and he makes a camp right there, right across the road or the river Orontes from the Hittites. They are literally in a half day's march from each other. And as you can see, Kadesh is right here. And when he is encamped here, his scouts actually capture two of the Hittite scouts and they bring them in front of Ramses. And this is how the dialogue for that goes. So Ramses is brought he's brought the scouts and he says, "What are ye?" And then the scout comes back and he says, "As for us, the vanquished chief of Keta has caused that we should come to spy out where his majesty is," meaning the Pharaoh. So they've come to spy on Ramses II. Ramses interjected from this, and he says, "Where is he, the vanquished chief of Keta?" And then the scout responds and says this, "He's in the land of Aleppo. See, the vanquished chief of Keta is stationed, together with many countries, which he has brought with him by force, being every country which is in the districts of the land of Keta, the land of Naharin, and of all Kode. They are equipped with infantry and chariotry, bearing their weapons. More numerous are they than the sand of the shore. See, they are standing, drawn up for battle, right behind Kadesh the deceitful." So Ramses is in a dire strait at this point. He just has his household guard. He has his mercenary force, probably, that was always surrounding him. Probably had his prized lion as well, and we can look this up. And he had 5,000 of his soldiers. And the division of Ra hadn't even crossed the Orontes River yet, so he was stranded all by himself, pretty much, right across from the Hittite king. Okay, so here's what happened next. So we have the Egyptian Pharaoh right here. We have Muatali here, and we have Kadesh here. So Ra is about a half day's march behind, and they are spurred into action when the Pharaoh sends messengers to them that Muatali is literally right across the road there. So what they do is they come up through the wilderness, and then they crossed over the Orontes River. The Hittite king gets information of this, and he sends a massive chariot force around the city of Kadesh, over a ford in the Orontes River, and over this river, and attacks the Ra corps from the west, or from the east rather, and just obliterates them. He scatters them in all directions, and then the remnants of Ra will come back up to the Egyptian camp up here with the division of Amun, and they freak the camp out. The camp starts going crazy, and what happens next? Yeah, everybody abandons Ramses II. So it's just him and his personal bodyguard and probably his lion. So this is what he's looking like right here. And you know what? I've mentioned this lion a few times. So let's go ahead and look up this lion, see if it comes up. Because I know there is an engraving of this lion literally like chowing down on one of the Hittites. I will find this for y'all real quick. But here's kind of what it is. So he would have his Nubian mercenaries shackle these guys, right, and then unleash them upon his enemies. Pretty cool. All right, so what happens next? We have the division of Ra scattered. They flee up to the division of Amun, and they scatter the rest of the camp because they freak him out. The division of Amun completely leaves Ramses, and he's stranded there by himself. So what does Ramses do next? He gets in his chariot and he fights off the invading or the attacking Hittite chariot force. So they are descending upon the Egyptian camp. They bombard the Egyptian camp. And then Ramses takes up his mantle, gets in his chariot, and leads 6 chariot charges against the Hittites. This guy had some big old balls, and that's what he does. And this is the account. So it goes like this: Lo, the foes of the vanquished chief of Keta surrounded the bodyguard of his majesty, who were by his side. When his majesty saw them, he was enraged against them, like his father, Montu, lord of Thebes. He seized the adornments of battle and arrayed himself in his coat of mail. He was like Baal in his hour. Then he betook himself to his horses and led quickly on, being alone by himself. He charged into the foes of the vanquished chief of Keta and the numerous countries which were with him. His majesty was like Suteka, the great in strength, smiting and slaying among them. His majesty hurled them headlong, one upon another, into the water of the Orontes. It then goes on to say that Ramses II charged all countries while I was alone, my infantry and my chariotry having forsaken me. Not one among them stood to turn about. I swear, as Ra loves men, as my father Atum favors me, that as for every matter which his majesty has stated, I did it in truth, in the presence of my infantry and chariotry. Yeah, so he led 6 charges against the Hittites and kind of stays them off. And guess what happens next? The Hittite chariotry break rank and plunder the camp of Ramses II instead of killing him. They could have ended it right there, but I guess they saw all the silver, they saw the food stores, and they plundered the camp. Okay, and so Ramses is now the Hittite force is kind of crippled at this point because they lost their biggest weapon, which was a chariot charge, and now they're pretty much just taking away that advantage. And then Egypt comes in and pretty much skirmishes them from there. Now, the next part of the story is extremely cool. So these Nearine soldiers, right? The Nearine arrives from the north right in the nick of time and attacks the Hittites from the north, and he assists the Egyptians in helping Ramses II not die. And then right as that happens, you have the division of Ta come up from the south and swoop in and pretty much take the day for the Egyptians, and they win the battle. They win the battle, but it's kind of hard to say whether or not they won the war, because right after Ramses just he left Kadesh and he came back down to Egypt, to pretty much revel in his spoils. And the Hittites come in and swoop up the void, and then kind of a stalemate ensues from there for a little bit, and several more campaigns occur. So then I think it was quote me if I'm wrong, I think it's 11 or 17 or something like that year of his reign, he comes back up and attacks Kadesh again, but he surrounds it. He surrounds the city and then attacks it. And then after that, the first ever formal peace treaty between nations was formed between the Hittites and Egypt, and it secured Egypt a lot of land and gave both of them a little bit of freedom of mind. So here is what the first ever peace treaty looked like. It was written on a big old slab of stone, carved up, and we still have remnants of this today that we can read. And what I'll do before the end of this podcast is I will read a few excerpts from it, because it is really profound and it works really well, because the Hittites and the Egyptians don't go to war again after this point. And Ramses II pretty much lives this prosperous and super long reign. He lives till 91 years old, probably close to that. And that's a 67-year reign, which is fantastic. I mean, it's the only person, I think only one other person was able to reign longer than Ramses II. Okay, I did a little bit of surfing and I couldn't find the actual text for some reason. I probably just didn't look hard enough. But what we can see here is what actually happened on Wikipedia. So this is kind of what it ensured. So the peace treaty of Ramses II and Muwatalli or this is actually his son, is known as one of the most. Is it his son? I don't know. That's a weird name. I need to double check that. Sorry. I'm almost positive it was between Muwatalli and Ramses. I could be. I think I'm wrong. I haven't gotten to the time period after Ramses II, and so it was probably his son, anyways, Muwatalli's son. Okay, so basically, sorry guys, the peace treaty is known as one of the most important official international peace treaties between two great powers from ancient Near East because its exact wording is known to us. Divided into points, the treaty flows between the Egyptians and Hittites as each side makes pledges of brotherhood and peace to the other in terms of the objectives. The treaty can be seen as a promise of peace, whereas peace and alliance, promise of peace and alliance, since both powers make the mutual guarantee that they will not invade each other's lands. That provision ensured that both participants would act in harmony regarding the disputed Syrian holdings and, in effect, establishes boundaries for the conflicting claims. Like a land treaty as well. No longer, according to the treaty, would costly Syrian campaigns be waged between the two new Near Eastern powers. Sorry, guys, I'm like really tired right now. Slurring my words. As a formal reunification of further hostilities is made. All right. So that's kind of what happens. It's really cool. And then there's so many clauses. Like a second clause is promote an alliance by making reassurances of aid, most likely military support. So they would support each other if people invade. And if either party was attacked by a third party or by internal forces of rebellion or insurgency, they would sweep in and help each other out. So they went from being pretty much mortal enemies to being each other's buddies. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at a few of the building projects of Ramses II, which were more than colossal. I mean, I think he was the coolest builder in all of Egyptian history. I mean, we never see stuff like this until this point. Like, this is absolutely mind-boggling. Like, think about the scale of this thing right here. A human's probably going to be, I don't know, right around the top of this sign. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Um, and yeah, so this is absolutely massive. They had to carve out the stone, and it's just insane how they did this. What is really interesting also is that Ramses II was one of the first pharaohs, besides Akhenaten and a few others, who would depict their wife, their great wife, next to him at equal stature. I mean, a majority of the time you would have the wife being depicted a lot smaller. So Ramses obviously really, really cared and revered and was probably impressed by his wife and what all she could do. And so he depicted her with him in all of these. So that's her and that's her. And you can see below their children are engraved in below here. So this is just one of the temples of many for Ramses II. And then if you watch the episode that I made, this was actually the statue, I believe, that had to be resurfaced and moved elsewhere because of the flooding of Aswan. But yeah, this is absolutely crazy. And the symmetry of the statue is it's almost impossible to believe how they were able to achieve this because it's impossibly perfect symmetry. I watched a video where somebody took a half, like divided the face in half and then folded it on each other, and it was literally a perfect recreation of both sides, which is fantastic. We can't even do that today, I don't think. So here is the Ramesseum, and he built this. This is another temple to him, and it seems like somebody didn't like him. They removed all of his head because a big thing in removing the kind of presence of past pharaoh was by removing them and removing their statues and really just trying to completely eradicate them from memory. Okay, so I think we'll wrap this video up pretty soon. I just wanted to do a little test video and see if I would like doing these things, and I think I will. So Ramses II kind of concluded the most prosperous time in Egyptian history. He was the last of the great pharaohs, I believe. Even Ramses III would not be considered a great pharaoh like his father, even though he has military prowess. Ramses is known as the Great for a lot of reasons. And this, like, the rise and fall of Egypt was almost like historically instant. Right after Akhenaten came in with his heresy, you see a decline in Egypt, a rise again with Ramses II, and then a very stark decline after that, all the way up into the Roman period. And this dialectic kind of is captured by a poem by Percy Bysshe Shelley, and it's called Ozymandias. And I'll go ahead and read this out real quick. So I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip, a sneer of cold command, tell that its sculptor well the passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So it's a little bit kind of like, man, it's like we're ending the great Egyptian empire with this, and that poem captures it 100%. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this. And I will definitely be doing some more in the future on all of the things that I was really most interested in with this podcast. So if you don't follow me on my podcast, please do that. Go to my Instagram, and it's Inspiration Podcast, all one word, all lowercase. And then you can look up on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts and etc. Anchor. Inspiration Podcast. And instead of all lowercase, the I and the P will be capitalized, but it's all one word. So go ahead and check me out, and I'll see y'all next time. Stay intrigued. Peace.